And today, each will present a little bit about their organizations and their approach to land conservation and planning for a forested future. First, it's Kelly Collins-Choi, who brings over 15 years experience in land conservation and policy, and is the Director of Policy and Land Conservation at Casey Trees in DC, our organization. And Kelly will share with us what land conservation looks like in the nation's capital.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Collins-Choi with Casey Trees. Casey Trees was formed a little over 20 years ago in response to significant decline in the tree canopy of the District of Columbia. Our mission is to restore, enhance, and protect the tree canopy of our nation's capital, and more recently, the greater national capital region. We do that by connecting people to trees and connecting people through trees. So since our inception, we've grown in both scope and programming. Along with our tree planting programs, we have a tree farm that functions as the DC State Tree Nursery. We have robust environmental education programs. We're active in environmental legislation and teaching our residents how to advocate for the trees that they love. But over the years, we've also watched as our city and our region has become more and more built out to the point we now have more impervious surface in the district than we do green space. And we knew that we needed more tools to protect our existing tree canopy and our existing green spaces. And specifically, we needed a mechanism for perpetual land protection. And so that inspired us to become a land trust. So we are now the only accredited land trust working across the District of Columbia, as well as the urbanized areas of Prince George's County. Woo. Woo. So as an urban conservation trust, we are looking at preserving those ecologically significant areas of our city, the remaining woodlands and wetlands and wildlife habitat. But we're also prioritizing those areas that are going to be important for our communities. So areas that are going to help our communities battle urban heat and flooding and the health inequities. So we do that by overlaying a lot of our data in a GIS targeting system. So we overlay our environmental, our climate, our community health data to target those areas where conservation will have the greatest impact. We currently have 10 conservation sites throughout the city and Prince George's County. These are food forests, forest patches, and pocket parks. They are embedded within our communities. We do say that we often preserve these spaces in square feet rather than acres, but these small spaces have an outsized impact for our communities. And community is at the core of every project. Every community is different, and the models that we use to work with every community differ. So in Edgewood, Northeast DC, experiencing extreme heat and flooding, the community looked at vacant lots in the alleys behind their house, and they got together to clean up and try to purchase those lots to create a green space. And so we're working with them, providing technical assistance and funding resources on their mission. Over in Bloomingdale, the community created a beautiful park, Crispus Attucks, but they were concerned about how to ensure it stayed green in perpetuity. And so we're working with them. We placed a conservation easement on the park to be that backstop to ensure that it does retain that green benefit for the community for generations to come. With every community and every space, we are really interested in stewarding these spaces. Every conservation easement, whether it's private or public, we find a way to work to enhance the ecology of the site. We also own properties outright where we work with the community to re-envision and restore these spaces. So I mentioned stewardship. Stewardship is critical. Just like we don't plant a tree and walk away, we don't preserve a green space and walk away. We look at it as an opportunity to assist with ecological uplift, and so we work with the landowner to create a stewardship plan. These plans are ways to look at restoring site conditions, enhancing ecology of the site, and community benefit. So that may include identifying threats by invasive species and interventions to take care of them, helping remove trash, or finding ways to make the site more accessible to the community. We try to make this at no or low cost to the landowner, and we do that by bringing in our community volunteers, grant funding, and working with partners such as Ward 8 Woods or the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. So I'm excited to share a couple of examples of two of our ongoing conservation sites. The first is known as Hellbender Hill. It's a 1-acre forest patch in Northeast DC, just a couple miles south of here. This is a property that is owned by the District Department of Housing and Community Development. They did transfer a conservation easement to us as part of their Vacant to Vibrant program. So we've been working with the Urban Forestry Division to conduct multiple community cleanups. We've had dozens of volunteers out there taking down what was once just a wall of green invasive plants, pulling out bush honeysuckle, English ivy, and a lot of trash. And we've been able to open up enough space to last year plant over 50 native trees. We've also been able to secure grant funding to create this natural trail that doubles as stormwater and erosion control and really welcomes neighbors into the forest. Another project is in Prince George's County, Maryland. We were donated a property in Riverdale Park. It's about 2 blocks from the MARC station and the farmer's market. We've been working with the community to reimagine this space. We went to the farmer's market to conduct community charrettes and get input into the design. We're excited to have funding from Prince George's County Department of Environment and Nature Sacred to transform this site. We're pulling out a lot of invasives, a lot of bamboo, and we're going to be planting over 60 native trees in understory this fall. That will create more of an eco-functional space, increasing biodiversity, assisting with water quality in the tributary of the Anacostia that runs along the border of this property, and providing a green oasis for the neighbors. Oh, that's it. Well, so in closing, I would like to welcome any interest. If you know of a community that's interested in preserving green space, if you have a green space that you'd like to preserve, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Next, we have Matt Gerhardt, who leads the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust's land protection strategies. Matt builds on a career in urban and natural resource conservation, originally from California, working in California, now in Virginia. Matt will share with us what planning for a forested future means across their 15 jurisdiction, 2.2 million acre service area. So a little different from what we preserve in DC. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and very, very pleased to be talking about this regionally across all the jurisdictions that we've got going on. We often don't get that opportunity. Again, my name's Matt. I'm Conservation Director at Northern Virginia Conservation Trust. For many of you who may not know us, we are a small but mighty conservation trust based out of Annandale, Virginia. We were founded in 1994. For most of our history, we were a small, all-volunteer board, no staff type trust, which is common with the movement of land trusts across the country, if you're familiar with that. There are now several thousand land trusts nationwide, so anywhere with anyone you want to promote conservation, there will be a local land trust that they can reach out to. But the vast majority of those organizations are still very small and working their way up the chain. At the far end, you've got the TNCs, the Nature Conservancy, Trust for Public Land, but there's thousands and thousands of community-based organizations like ours that work with local citizens trying to do private land protection in their area. That's our staff. We're up to 10 with 2 interns. And as Vince mentioned, we have a complicated and very large area. We grew up, again, just in the Beltway around Fairfax, Alexandria, and Arlington, but expanded over time. And now do try to cover the very rapidly expanding region of Northern Virginia that now, you know, we don't always say the southern end of our service area there is down in Spotsylvania. King George, they don't think of themselves as Northern Virginia, but Northern Virginia is coming their way. And that pressure is very real. We see that every day. And I don't want that to be a bad word, and nor do I think you all, in terms of what type of future we're looking for at the regional level. We are a fairly traditional interest as a broad-based mission. We do historic preservation, biodiversity conservation, scenic views, that sort of thing. And we've done it primarily through conservation easements, which is a technical tool for protecting private land through a contractual arrangement. We'll speak about funding and how it relates to that incentive. We have about 140 easements we've protected. And we own about 38 small preserves, nature preserves, heron rookery, and some other natural spots. To date, we've conserved over 9,000 acres. A couple things just to touch for the conversation bigger for later are sort of what are the big pressures we're dealing with and how are we addressing them. I'll give just a couple examples. So it's hard not to speak about the two things I have on the picture here. Data centers and solar development are rampant, if you will, in the region. They're very interconnected, and if I made this slide, actually as of this week, I would add power line development in the region as well. We're working on several properties that are going to be impacted by expansion projects. This is sort of our development ecosystem in large measure, because even though Virginia has set a very aggressive renewables goal, which I very much laud and we very much support renewable energy, greenfield development has not been really the best answer for that, and it is causing impacts. And Dominion has projected up to a 50% increase in energy demand in the next 10 years. So the renewable footprint that's going in is serving the data center world, and the power lines that are coming are doing the same. And our conservation landscape is getting additionally fragmented and pressured because of that. With that, though, I would also add just regular old development is what we fight every day. Or what we work with every day, and I call this delayed build-out. This is a 5-acre property that was conserved over 20 years ago near Prince William Forest Park for a federally endangered plant species, and it was at the time deemed sufficient for the residential development, urban development going in around the area, but it was a part of a much bigger landscape. It was down to about 12 to 15 acres of landscape left until this is about 2 months ago. This is, anytime I know those of you who do tree work, anytime you see the trunks of the tree, you know that you've got a problem. This was all just cleared for mini mart, gas station development, and now our preserve is the last thing standing, both for the plant and for that sort of local patch of nature. That plan was put in place 20 years ago. And only now are people seeing the effects, and sort of the visibility of our work. The way we baked things into our planning is a major challenge that I want to hopefully talk more about with you. What are we doing to try to address that? Just to give you two hints at the opposite ends of the scale. We work in very small settings down to 0.1 acres in Alexandria. And I'll try to talk about the big picture too. This is a site which is a nice little spot in Alexandria that we worked with the landowner. It's a privately owned lot. I'm going to have to tell them about Doug's recommendations about lawn and landscaping in a little bit, but they actually did do quite a cool thing. That looks like a normal house site, but that's actually a full residential lot in the foreground there that is separate and developable, and a whole house would have gone there. The landowner decided they didn't want that. Conserved the lot with us, re-landscaped it, and has made it into a small little private pocket park of their own that nearby neighbors can come sit out. Someday we may take that on. We could do restoration there. The county could get it, and that has formally been set aside. So that's at the tiny scale. At the large scale, we are also trying to engender better planning, more comprehensive look at the region. We've recently spent 2 years on a regional conservation analysis for our service area that we're sharing with our jurisdictions to try to target sort of the best of what's remaining in the region. And that fragmentation is very intense in suburban sprawl areas. Those patches are very small, but we worked for a long time with folks you may know, Biohabitats out of Baltimore, to ensure that we could find the conservation priorities even inside our landscape in the Beltway. So there's actually, this is showing the generalized prioritization, but there's landscapes even right where we work in Annandale that are highlighted in that analysis. And that does not happen in traditional conservation prioritizations. They, typically prioritize the Shenandoah, right? Not in the city. The way we did that was through some specific factors I have up there, looking at urban heat islands, looking at social vulnerability. We found sort of how could landscape be valued for what it contributes, apples to apples. I think more increasingly we are working with development, working alongside development. Housing has become a much bigger issue for our region here and the land trust community in general. These are just two examples. 157 acres in Prince William County, again, that was subject of a very controversial development proposal outside of their urban growth zone, but was approved with a park developed alongside, and the community asked us to take an easement on the county park to ensure that would always remain low density and natural space. On the right is a community space in Fairfax County near Fort Belvoir, 19 acres of space that was set aside along a stream valley and about 10 acres of forest restoration that went in alongside a mixed-use townhouse and age-restricted community that was being redeveloped on a golf course. So this now provides miles of trails and a lovely space as well as a restoration opportunity. So that's some of the future we see and hope to be doing more of. Thank you.
Mia Rothberg is a forest conservation planner at M-NCPPC. For those not in the know, it's Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, and is the primary contact for Montgomery County's reforestation and tree planting programs, coordinating community and agency partners. Mia shares with us what conservation looks like not only in Maryland, but at the county level. Welcome, Mia.
Thank you, Vince, for that introduction. As he said, my name is Mia Rothberg, and I'm here today representing the Montgomery County Planning Department. So, as he said, that's part of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. I know many of you here are my parks colleagues, but for those of you who don't know, the commission, as we call it, is a bi-county quasi-state agency made up of 2 county planning boards, which are both appointed by and report to their respective county councils. Montgomery Planning is here on the left, and you can see that our closest colleagues are the Parks Department. You'll hear a little bit more about our work with them today. In Montgomery Planning, we are lucky to be stewards of the Montgomery County Forest Conservation Law. This law was enabled by the Maryland State Forest Conservation Act of 1991, which requires each state to have, or each county, sorry, to have either their own law or follow the state law. Their own laws can be stronger if we like, so in Montgomery County, we're proud to usually be more stringent than the state law. Our most recent updates in 2023 are what we call no net loss of forest, aiming to have no net loss of forest on balance across all projects in any given fiscal year. And many of the policies in this law were adopted in the most recent version of the state law as well. Essentially, projects that are subject to this law, like subdivisions or developments, must either conserve forest or meet a forest loss mitigation requirement in order to be in compliance with the law. So there are a few ways for them to achieve this. First, as I mentioned, our #1 priority is requiring developers to conserve forest on site where possible. In order for these forests to count as conserved, they must be placed in a forest conservation easement. And these easements are a little bit different than what most of you consider. So in Montgomery County, our easements are commission-held easements on private property that protect the area in perpetuity, as with most easements. But in contrast to most where you're working with excited landowners, our easements are created as part of a compulsory part of the development process. So in order to enforce the easements and ensure that everything is being followed, we have a team of inspectors who make sure there's no mowing, dumping, or any prohibited activity occurring. We have about 12,000 easements across, 12,000 acres of easement across the county and about 4,000 different properties. So it's a pretty big task for our team of 4. If there's no forest available on site for a developer to protect, or they can't protect the forest and achieve their goals, then we allow them to consider other on-site mitigation, putting land in an easement and planting new forest that they then must maintain for the first 5 years. But if there's no available planting on site, we allow them to consider off-site mitigation, which is most often what we see in more developed areas of the county. The first priority for off-site mitigation are our forest banks market, which is essentially a private market of off-site forest conservation easements. But as a last resort, we allow developers to contribute to our Forest Conservation Fund, where they pay at a rate of $1.55 a square foot to a fund managed by our department. This fund contributes to our Reforest Montgomery program and entirely funds this program, which is a suite of 3 reforestation programs and 3 tree planting programs. For context, our reforestation programs are at least a 1/4 acre in size, and we're planting at a rate of 100 trees per acre, whereas our tree planting programs are more landscape trees. Although Reforest Montgomery as a brand was launched in spring 2020, our oldest program dates back to 2008. And for context as to the size of our program, we have 2 dedicated full-time staff, and we planted about 2,000 trees in our last fiscal year, with the majority of our funding being focused on our reforestation programs. All of the trees we plant are native or near native in compliance with our law. Now, before we get more into each of our programs, I also want to touch on where we focus our work. These blue outlines here are the priority watersheds outlined by the Forest Conservation Law. And for those of you who are familiar with the county, the northern portions of those watersheds roughly follow the ICC. If you're not familiar with the county, just know that the areas within those watersheds are where most of our development is occurring and most of the suburban and urban parts of the county are. In Silver Spring, we're down there in the very south of the county. So you can see most of our work is in these priority watersheds. We're really prioritizing putting the money back in the communities that it's coming out of. So I'll touch briefly on each of our programs. Our first and longest running program is a partnership with our co-hosts today, Montgomery Parks, to reforest unused areas of parkland. Through this program, we work with park staff to identify areas like stream buffers or the edges of existing forests that are ideal for reforestation, and we source most of the trees directly from Montgomery Park's Pope Farm Nursery. We've planted about 64 acres of forest since 2008 through this program, and you can see one of our oldest sites right here, just upstream of a WSSC filtration plant. For each of our reforestation programs, we hold ourselves to the same standards that we hold developers, providing at least 5 years of maintenance and management to each site post-planting. Our second program works very similarly to our parks reforestation, but we target those forest conservation easements that I mentioned before. We look for this specifically at easements that were either never required to be planted due to previous, less stringent iterations of our law, or easements that have lost their forest due to natural pressures. And we work with private property owners through the whole process the same way we work with park staff, eventually planting forest at least a quarter acre. And through this, we've planted about 12 acres of forest. And finally, our Relief the Reserve program targets the northern portions of the county and the agricultural reserve and is a partnership with the Montgomery Countryside Alliance. Through this 6-year partnership, we've planted about 20.5 acres of easements. And unlike most of the 12,000 other easements in the county, most of these were created specifically for the purpose of this program. So I'll also briefly touch on our tree planting programs. As I mentioned, our priority is to use our funding for reforestation. We're part of the Forest Conservation Law, after all, but we use these trees as a way to supplement and make sure we're actually putting projects back in the developed areas. This yard you can see here is about a mile from here and is an area near downtown Silver Spring where there really isn't space to put any forest. So our first and most popular program is our free shade tree program, through which we plant about 60 to 80 trees each fall and spring in priority funding areas identified by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources that cover most of the urban and suburban areas of the county. As I mentioned, this is our most popular program, so each season we're receiving hundreds of applications and are only able to accept about 20 to 30. And we prioritize applications from equity census tracts identified by our department. We assist property owners through the entire tree planting process here, helping them select trees that are appropriate for their property, and then coordinating contractors, including our co-host Casey Trees, to actually plant the trees. Our second program is another partnership with Montgomery Parks to transplant large caliper trees, roughly 4 to 7 inches in diameter, from Pope Farm to local parks. These are trees that have grown too large for park staff to move on their own, so we fund a contractor to move the trees. And just like with our parks reforestation program, most of the sites we're planting were selected and reviewed by park staff, and park staff are also great at providing aftercare to these trees. Our final and most flexible program is our native tree coupons. Any resident of the county can use as many $50 coupons as they like at any time at one of 6 participating local nurseries to purchase native trees and plant them themselves. So it's a great way for people who are unable to participate in our other programs to quickly get trees on their property. And for context, we've reimbursed over 5,000 coupons since 2020, although this program existed for several years prior to that. As I hope I've emphasized throughout this presentation, we're really nothing without our community partners and the residents that we work with. In order to reach new partners and residents, we send out newsletters to over 1,000 subscribers each quarter with information advertising our programs, as well as proper tree care. And we also supplement with weekly watering alerts tailored to Montgomery County. We're always looking to expand our work to new neighborhoods, so during application periods, we also work with our communications department to post on different community next door pages in order to find new equity areas to plant in. On a more formal note, during major law updates, we convene working groups with both developers and environmental advocates to ensure that we're taking their voices into account even before we reach public hearing stages. And finally, you'll often find members of both our Reforest Montgomery team and our other environmental staff tabling at local festivals and events. So come say hi if you see us. We're always happy to chat more. Thank you.
So I guess the first question is, this is the Urban Tree Summit. We're talking urban, we're talking trees. So what is the role of permanent land conservation in forest protection or promoting urban tree canopy? And we can start with Kelly.
Thanks, Vince. So as we mentioned, our area is rapidly developing. There is a lot of development. We have pretty strong tree laws in the district and our surrounding jurisdictions, both in regards to development and mitigation requirements. But we also have to recognize that most of our laws are not permanent. There are also often loopholes, exemptions, or sometimes a lack of enforcement. And to me, that's where permanent protection of these properties through land conservation fills a gap and a need to ensure that these green spaces and the natural infrastructure of our communities can be protected for future, for climate resilience and access of our residents to nearby nature.
Thanks. I think one of the things that I react to a lot is the idea that conservation is the best of the last. That was actually a theme of one of our major organizations for many years. We're out to kind of capture what we can before it's all gone, and that's a theme you've already heard repeated today. I think of it more as holding space, in a sense, for community and by the local community, because the frank fact is without the space to do restoration, to do ecological enhancement, we tend to not do that. We could tear down the malls, tear down the highways, rebuild over time, but what has been lost at that point is so great. So largely, I feel like that's our job in our space, is to create these mechanisms, use these tools like conservation easements, protect that space for the future, and ideally, we really do stem some of the loss of this canopy. Knowing that this is just a bit of a drop in the bucket, it has to be aligned with policy as well. So the role for the private land conservation space is largely to buffer and enhance the public part of it, which is very, very significant as well. But we need, again, all people rowing in the same direction, and that's our chief thought.
And just to add on, from the Maryland perspective, we have a whole patchwork of laws that we're working within in order to really aim for that land conservation. As I mentioned, the #1 priority of our forest conservation law is to conserve forests on site. One thing that's interesting, though, is there isn't really any way to force conservation of forest outside of a development project. So one thing that we work with is our Forest Banks program in order to help people monetize the protection of forest on their property. So if someone has an existing forest, we can help them through the process of establishing an easement on that forest, and then they can sell theoretical credits to developers in order to monetize and earn money from protecting that forest, which is a great way to encourage people to protect it while still recognizing that permanently dedicating your land does have a significant financial cost.
Wonderful. And as you three presented, you kind of showed a variety of different programs and different conservation easements and things like that. What are some of the tools and conservation mechanisms you're finding most effective right now, whether that's easements, zoning updates, specialized programs? You start with me at this time.
Sure. So in Montgomery County, we're really lucky to sit at the nexus of sort of all of these things that Vince listed. Without our laws and our zoning ordinances, we wouldn't have any easements, we wouldn't have any funding for these programs. So I think not a single one of these would be effective for us without all of the others acting at the same time.
I would say for Virginia, that ratio of easements to holdings we have has a lot to do with the way it's structured in terms of the incentives that were created for landowners to participate in these programs. As was mentioned, when you make a permanent commitment to protect your land, it's a big financial commitment in many ways. So conservation easements have become the tool of art for most places. That doesn't always work, right? And we need to be thinking about funding streams for our state that will enhance what we do achieve through conservation easements, through purchases and other mechanisms as well. So that we can talk about funding later, but that's probably the biggest gap we have, is in the public funding for proactive conservation.
So right now in the district, I have to say we've had a lot of interest from private landholders that have often been longtime residents of the city and have watched development eat away at the forests that surround them that they might have grown up with. And so we have people that have reached out to donate properties donate conservation easements everywhere from Anacostia up through Forest Hills. So we're excited and hope that trend continues. As far as policy tools, the district has really strong tree laws. Our heritage tree law is unique in that it states that any tree that's over 100 inches in circumference cannot be removed. It can be relocated, which is a pretty expensive proposition. But we're finding that that law has had some positive unintended consequences. Often developers that may have just clear cut the entire site don't do so because it's not economically feasible with the heritage tree kind of providing protection for the trees surrounding it. So we have, we're hoping that that might also kind of spur some of those developers to consider donating those forest patches, but we'll see.
Thanks. Matt, you're absolutely right. We're going to talk funding now. Because I'm sure a question everyone has is how does all this get paid for, right? So the question is, what funding models, what do those look like in your jurisdictions? What are some of the strengths and weaknesses? Matt can start this time, maybe. Someone's got to go first.
Okay, yeah, I teased that. So, well, Vince led on that I had come over this way from California, which has very robust public funding. And Virginia has the opposite approach, which is private incentives through essentially tax benefits. There's a federal incentive for conservation easements, which is pretty robust. It helps landowners basically take the value that has changed as a result of removing developability off their property and take that over time through an extended tax deduction. So that mechanism can play out up to 16 years for landowners. They can generally recoup a lot of that value, but that's a deduction. Virginia is one of 2 states in the country, Colorado's the other, that introduced a state tax credit that is not just available to landowners to additionally compensate for that change in value, or if you've got a lot of your value locked in your land, you can access it through this tax credit. And that is a transferable credit. So it's actually sellable on a market that's local, and it allows people to essentially get cash out of their property for having protected it. That has been a major lever for making people interested in doing this. It's 40% of that value. It's not really enough to get everybody to sign up for it, but that's been a private tax incentive, which has driven a lot. On the public funding, it's very, very small. We have about $16 million statewide to do conservation. So it's the way that the state has decided to attack this challenge. And I don't know if you want to go to Maryland or DC.
All right, thank you. In Maryland, as I mentioned, we're funded entirely through developer fees for our programs, so that has some pros and cons. As a pro, we have enough money in our bank account to last us the next couple of years, so we're pretty insulated from regional economic swings. But as cons, that really restricts the uses that we can use our money for. So for the first couple decades of the Maryland Forest Conservation Act, none of the counties that had forest conservation funds could use that money on private property. It all had to go to public property, and that really restricted what people were doing and really just led to a backup of money in these accounts. And so the state eventually opened up these programs to private properties, which led to the creation of my program, Reforest Montgomery. One of the other limits we have is that this money can only be used for tree planting and care. So we can't use it for staff time. I mentioned that we only have 2 full-time staff. In order to get these staff, we have to have the positions approved by our county council, which can be pretty hard to do. For Montgomery planning as a whole, we have 150 staff, and each year the county council is only really considering 1 new staff person. So our programs are being entirely limited by that staff time because we just can't use our money to fund any staff.
Thanks. So in the District of Columbia, we have a tree fund, which is funded by permits that are issued when residents or the government remove special trees. That's a pretty robust fund, but it is used for tree planting. It does not have a provision for tree protections and conservation. There is no conservation funding available through the city. Unlike Maryland and Virginia, we also don't have any specific local tax credits for donations of land. So it's tough. The district is a very expensive place to try to practice conservation. We've primarily been relying on philanthropic donations. We look at acquiring properties below market value through our city's tax sales. We have worked with a number of advocates to enact and put forward legislation to create a new natural area conservation department within our Department of Energy and Environment. They are now funded, which is fantastic, but they are relying solely on stewardship of city-owned properties. They go out and manage invasive plants and help communities do the same. So we're really exploring, and if anyone would like to help us, looking for ways to create incentives and funding streams within the district for this work.
Thank you. My question is for Kelly, and I was pleased to hear from Mia about this forest banking concept, and I'm wondering if the word of conservation, mitigation banking is something that's used, I think, in wetlands and industry and in Alaska, where I've spent some time. Is this a model that would work in DC, where we have a no net loss concept or regulation? Do you think it would work in the city?
It's actually something we are exploring. We've talked to folks in different agencies as well as the district council to see if it's something that we could get up and running. So there are some bureaucratic hurdles to overcome as to who would manage that program and what it would look like exactly. But I think that it could provide a model for the district, yes.
I'm in awe of all the things y'all are doing to save our miraculous trees in this region. I do wonder, though, what the impact of climate change is having on your work. I just published a book called The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, which is about the mass mortality of oak trees that we're seeing in this region. And it's not me saying it's climate change, it's Bartlett Tree Experts, who are a major sponsor here. It's our city arborist in Tacoma Park. We've lost 45 acres of tree canopy just in the last few years, primarily the really big oak trees that are being affected by climate change. So I'm just wondering, how do you deal with that? What can we do? And you can, if you read my book, you'll get my ideas of what we can do. But I'm interested in how do you guys deal with the extreme weather on top of everything else?
Go ahead.
Right, thanks, Mike, and also an excellent book would recommend to everyone here. As a Tacoma Park resident, I also noticed many of that loss of trees, and while we were working on our programs, we did have to start taking those things into account. So one of the things we recently did to start combating the severe weather is adding watering to all of our reforestation sites. Those sites that I had photos of from 2008, we didn't have to do any watering. We planted the trees, we removed invasives, but watering just wasn't necessary. And now, I think as we all pretty much know, it is. We only had about an inch of rain in the whole month of August in this area. And so it is really important to make sure we're getting those watering trucks out to make sure our reforestation sites survive. Additionally, we're adjusting our lists that we plant and that we require developers to plant to consider more climate resilient options. So trees that are native more towards Virginia or south of here, we're considering those as options and starting to phase out things like white pines that are more shifting their range.
I love that question. No biggie, climate, how are you going to deal with it? It is part of everything we think about, but it is extremely challenging. And I think the idea that you can't tackle it all at once is something you have to keep pretty close to yourself as you do this work. You have to realize that there are specific things you can be tackling that are pieces of the problem. And I think that's our approach. The slide I showed that has our sort of regional conservation analysis is very much focused on the idea of resilience in the landscape. And that idea I focused on about just holding the space, I think, is a critical aspect of that. That is not even close to the whole of the job. We are seeing pressures of invasive, takeover and death, oak death and other things on these properties. But I kind of get heartened in that at least we're keeping the property there for what needs to happen down the road. That's kind of part of it for me. Also, for reaching out to the community, we're trying to introduce best practices into the landscape. And when you go to a private landowner and you say, hey, I think you should tear out all your lawn and you should plant natives, they're kind of not going to be as excited about your message unless you can also say, come over and see our property where we tore out the lawn or restored some pine habitat or something along those lines. Let us talk with you about that. We're landowners too. We get it. We had a tree fall on a neighbor's car. I had that recently. We had to pay for that. You know, we have to limb. We have to do all these things too. So I think that's a valuable part of the picture is sort of picking up, rolling up your sleeves and doing the work alongside of other people and trying to lead the way to a more climate-friendly future. The last thing I would say is that slide about we all need to become a lot more savvy, very quickly about these very large-scale dynamics about how we are developing our landscape around renewables and energy use and land use patterns. And because these have effects that take decades for us to back out of. So any amount of attention you can pay to local planning, particularly in Virginia, local planning is very, very key. That's critical.
Yes.
So we think about climate in both our targeting and our stewardship of our conserved spaces. So we're often looking for places where we can pull out impervious surface and restore tree canopy for communities that are lacking and really need the shade to fight urban heat. Or creating a passive park design that we know is in a floodplain to help with flood storage. We are also looking at ways to restore and improve the health of the forests that we conserve to give them a better chance over the years as we deal with all of the impacts that climate change is throwing our way.
Hey, I'm from Arlington County, and the good news is the county's been planting a lot of trees in the public right-of-ways, particularly the state public right-of-ways, which are probably going to be our only undeveloped properties. The problem in Arlington County is it doesn't look like they have much follow-up on after they plant the trees, and at least the roads I drive on, there's only a 50% survival rate, if that much, from year to year. So I guess my question is, I'm just looking for policies that other jurisdictions have for maintenance of trees in the public right-of-way or anywhere.
Well, since I cover Arlington, I'll speak just quickly because I think they may have better incentives to discuss, but I'm familiar with those tree planting programs, and the county has taken a very public space focused approach to where it's active. We're the partner working on the private landscape side. I do think that, just to say really quickly, there is an upcoming process this fall. Their public spaces master plan process is kicking back off, and that's the sort of feedback they need in that process. And then what ideas you all have.
Alan, Aisha.
So I won't step on too many toes here. Most of our right-of-way plantings are the jurisdiction of the Montgomery County Department of Transportation. But one thing I've seen happen in Tacoma Park is Tacoma Park partnered with Casey Trees to plant trees on private property, but really in those right-of-way sections in front of people's houses. And even though it wasn't technically on the people's properties, they did engage the property owners. So they let the property owners know the trees were coming. They gave the property owners information about the care. And I think that really is an important way. A lot of our transportation departments or other public agencies just don't have the resources to keep up with watering trees, but most of right-of-way trees are in front of someone's house. And most people do actually like those trees and do want them to live. So I think it's mostly just informing people and keeping them aware of what's going on in order to engage them.
And there are two actions that it seems like that I'm hearing a lot. One, how do you actually get people to, get a tree, buy a tree, dig a hole in the ground, plant the tree, water it for long enough, and then maintain it long enough for it to take care of itself? And two, your problem is similar to the biggest problem in all of science, no matter what science it is, and that is finding funding for science. So I apologize for not having a question, but I have an offer. I created a tool to crowdsource funding to programs like this. So come find me during the talk. It's a tool that my organization, my company's name is TerraPulse, is surviving the federal budget cuts through this tool that I've created. And so I think we're all in the same boat. So I'm offering it to help.
Thank you, Joe. Joe, perhaps the question is, like, how do you inspire action? Maybe. How do you bridge that
I mean,
gap?
that's a key question. I would align with what Kelly said about there is a lot of excitement out there. When you go talk to people, there are a lot of people that truly believe in this. They've seen it with their own eyes. Not all of them have been on the land for 40, 50 years. Some of them have seen the changes recently. So I think a lot of our job is just tapping into the what's in the community underneath and letting people do it with real places that they know and love. I was just going to say, to your data comment, I just, having spent 2 years in a big data exercise, I would say we threw in every snazzy tree canopy measure we could think of, including some old growth metrics and things like that. But in several of the counties, including the ones in the room today, are put a lot of money into that effort regularly now. I would say that one of the major things is the quality of our forest, and not necessarily just what's covered in leaves, leaf cover. And changing that from a technical standpoint would have a huge change in where we're trying to focus, because the quality of what we find on different properties varies so extensively. So that's a plug back to you. Help us with that problem.
Thank you for the offer, and I will come and talk to you later. I love the idea of crowdsourcing funding. I think one of the things we've been trying to tackle, as Matt mentioned, obviously the community buy-in and enthusiasm is fantastic, but how do we reach the decision makers? And so trying to find better models for measuring the economic impact of these spaces is something that we've been struggling with. There's so many different ways that our green spaces and our forest patches benefit our communities and our cities, but they're often undervalued when it comes time for a developer to look at where is easiest to build. And so finding better ways to communicate their value to our legislators and our business community.
This is a question for Ms. Collins-Choi. I've been reading a lot about tiny forests and the Miyawaki method recently, and I was wondering if Casey Trees has been working on any little forest projects in Washington, D.C., like finding small plots of land to establish mature forests in a small span of time. It's great in urban settings for all the reasons we've talked about, so I was wondering if Casey Trees has been working on any of those.
So yeah, we've heard some great examples from other areas around the region. It's something that we've been exploring. I won't say that we have one in development as of yet, but looking for a good space and a good partner to do so.
Let's give a big hand for our panel, and please thank them.